Have a seat, because you're taking the oath. Yeah, have a seat. For those individuals who sat for the DC bar, can I have a show of hands, please, who did not receive the registration statement? If you sat for the DC bar, if you sat for the DC bar, if you physically sat for the DC bar. Okay, for those individuals who did not receive the registration statement, who were admitted to another jurisdiction or took the UBE somewhere else. While she's passing that out, once court is adjourned, there'll be 3 registration tables out of the corridor. Line up towards the first initial of the last name. Those individuals, the last name is A through F. You'll be at the far registration table on the left-hand side. For those individuals, the last name is G through N. You'll be at the registration table to your left as soon as you exit the courtroom. And those individuals whose last name is O through Z, you'll be at the registration table that's to your right as you exit the courtroom. For those individuals who have the supplemental questionnaire and it's not notarized, there is a notary, but you need to go to the registration table first to let the individual know that you need to have it notarized. The notary is located at 500 Indiana Avenue. And that's at the information desk. So as soon as you go in, it's on that level. And for those of you who are not familiar with the area, you go exit the building that you came in, make a left, go across the bridge. Once you reach the street, make a left. And actually, you go down the diagonal path, you'll see a water fountain with a statue. Once you peek out at the corner, that'll be 5th and Indiana. You'll see the Subway food chain to your right, glass enclosure in front of you. That's 500 Indiana Avenue, which is H. Cole Moultrie Courthouse. Again, for those individuals who just came in, all electronic devices should be turned off. There'll be no recording or photography of any kind. If you're a guest, there's alternate seating towards the right, so you have to exit the courtroom, go to the right, and have a seat in that room. If you're taking an oath, you need to have a seat. Quickly. If you're not taking an oath, you need to exit the courtroom, go towards your right. You'll see the door open, and that's where you have a seat. For those of you who are taking a mandatory course tomorrow, you want to be as prompt as possible. If you are late, you will have to reschedule. They will not allow you in to take that mandatory course. For those of you who are not taking a mandatory course tomorrow, you have up to a year to take the course from today's date. For those of you who have the supplemental questionnaire and do not know your applicant number, leave it blank. If it starts with a 0, that's not it. If it starts with an N, that's not it. So you can draw a single line through it. Once you go to the registration tables, we do ask that only the applicants line up because it slows down the process, and we have another ceremony after this one. So again, only the applicants who are taking the oath are to line up according to the first initial of the last name at the registration tables, and we'll process you that way.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. There you go. My name is Herb Roussan. I'm the Chief Deputy Clerk of the DC Court of Appeals. And I'd like to welcome you and your family, those who are here in support of you, to the historic courthouse, and congratulate you on the tremendous accomplishment and this joyous occasion. I know that Mr. Patrick's probably already mentioned it, but bears repeating, if at this time you have any electronic devices, phones, or anything like that, I'd ask that you would turn them off or silence them, and to remind you that there's to be no recording of any type or kind while court is in session or while the judges are on the bench. When the ceremony is over, you will have the opportunity to come down into the well of the court and take pictures if you would like, but I would ask that you would refrain from actually going up onto the dais to try to take pictures. So just in the well area of the court. At the appropriate time, I'll have the distinct honor and privilege of administering your oath this afternoon, and as part of that process, I'll begin by saying "I" and then state your name. And forgive me for stating the obvious, but unless your legal name is actually "state your name," that's the point at which you would insert your name. Also, as part of administering the oath, I will be using the word solemnly swear. If that term or phrase is objectionable to you, you may simply replace it with solemnly affirm. In a moment, we will be getting started. The judges will enter the courtroom, at which time you will be given further instructions as we proceed with this afternoon's ceremony. All right? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Welcome to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. I am Judge Glickman, and I have the pleasure of presiding today with Judge Farrell and Judge Ruiz over the admission of new members to the Bar of the District of Columbia. Before we proceed with that, I'd like to acknowledge the presence, if there is a presence to be acknowledged, not only of the new admittees, but of the family members and friends who are here to share in this happy occasion with them. I'm sure the new admittees are grateful to you for your support, and this court too is appreciative. We are glad you could be here. Without further ado, let me now recognize the designee of the Committee on Admissions, Ms. Lewis.
Good afternoon. May it please the court, on behalf of the Committee on the Missions of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, I, Ronika Lewis, Staff Attorney for the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, move the admission to the bar of this court, the applicants whose names appear on the attached list and who have satisfied the requirements for admission to the bar of this court. On behalf of the committee, I certify to the court that these applicants possess the necessary qualifications for admission to the bar.
Is this group of applicants as well qualified and trained as the group we saw this morning?
Yes, Your Honor.
If you would pass the motion to Mr. Roussan, and he will hand it to the judges on this bench, and we will look at it. Thank you. Well, the three judges on this panel have given this motion our careful, if expedited, scrutiny, and everything does appear to be in good order. It will reassure you to know that the applicants for admission are indeed a most talented and qualified group of lawyers. So I'm authorized to say that the court is pleased to grant the motion for admission. Mr. Roussan, would you please proceed to administer the oath?
Yes, Your Honor. For all new admittees, please stand. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that as a member of the bar of this court, I will demean myself uprightly and according to law. And that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America. Thank you. You may be seated.
Well, congratulations and a warm welcome to our bar. It is our custom on these occasions for a member of the judicial panel to offer some remarks, and today that privilege falls to my colleague, Judge Ruiz.
Thank you, Judge Glickman, and good afternoon, everybody. Now that you have been sworn in, you are all our new fellow members of the DC Bar. And as Judge Glickman says, also a very warm welcome to those of you who are here to share the moment with someone who just took the oath. I want to also welcome you to this building, this historic courthouse, which is the home of the DC Court of Appeals, which is the highest court of, although not in, the District of Columbia. It's one of the oldest public buildings in DC. It was originally commissioned as Washington City Hall in 1820 and designed by the architect George Hatfield. From that time to the present day, the building has played a number of roles, some of which you might not be aware of. It's been federal and a district courthouse as the judiciary in the city evolved, including a U.S. Circuit Court, U.S. District Court, Supreme Court of the District of Columbia, U.S. Court of Appeals, and the D.C. Court of General Sessions, which was a trial court. It functioned as a hospital and held prisoners of war during the Civil War. The building has housed several notable residents, among them the district attorney, who was Francis Scott Key. You might know him as the person who composed the national anthem. He had an office under this roof. Frederick Douglass had an office when he was the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. Theodore Roosevelt had an office here when he was head of the Civil Service Commission. More recently, the building housed offices for the Public Defender Service in the city, as well as for the DC Attorney General, then known as the Corporation Counsel. The building was renovated and rededicated as a DC Court of Appeals in 2009, and here we are. As a courthouse, it was the setting of several significant trials. In 1849, Daniel Drayton was prosecuted here. He was an abolitionist and the orchestrator of the largest recorded escape attempt by slaves aboard the schooner, the Pearl. In 1867, John Surratt was tried for conspiracy to assassinate President Lincoln here. President Lincoln's statue, as you might know, is erected outside the courthouse facing Indiana Avenue. That was done in 1868, and it is still there. 1925, the trial involving the Teapot Dome scandal, one of the biggest bribery scandals in U.S. history, was held in this building. And at the conclusion, Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, became the first cabinet officer convicted of a felony and imprisoned. And now, today, it is the setting for your admission to the bar of the District of Columbia. So we'll add that to the history books. I realize that this is not your first admission to practice after years of studying hard in law school and for the bar exam, and most likely after the accumulation of substantial debt for education loans. But no matter, taking the oath and listening to its words, not only with your head, but internalizing it and thinking about what they mean, it is a good reminder of the importance of being admitted to the practice of law. Let me tell you first about the bar of which you now form a part. Notwithstanding the small geographical size of the District of Columbia, the bar here is one of the largest in terms of absolute numbers in the country. At last count, over 100,000 members. It is certainly the largest bar on a per capita basis. And ours is a diverse bar, both in terms of its membership and the areas of practice in which its members engage. This court, with the assistance of several committees and disciplinary counsel, has the authority and responsibility to pass on the admission and the professional conduct of all lawyers in the District of Columbia. It's a responsibility we exercise and take very seriously. But let me tell you that from the vantage point of what we see in this court, not just in disciplinary proceedings, but the cases that come before us, I can tell you that the practice of law in this city is probably one of the most varied and exciting in the country. Some of you in this room practice in law firms, from large international firms to smaller local firms, or in government, whether local or federal, or for an international institution. You might be working in a trade association or with a consulting firm, public interest group, private business. Some of you will be litigators or are litigators or engage in transactional work. Others engage in analysis and policy work or in the legislative arena. Some of you will find your practice and keep it for a long time. But some of you, perhaps because of developing interests or of changes in the legal market, will shift your legal practice, maybe more than once. I hope that all of you will take advantage of the size and the diversity of our bar and the variety of opportunities that exists in the District of Columbia for legal work, as well as for service to our community. You're being admitted to the bar of DC, at the nation's capital, at a time that questions government and its institutions, and that includes the courts and the judicial system. The careful and fair application of law by courts and the integrity of the lawyers who practice before them are crucial. Remember the oath that you took today and the responsibility it imposes on each one of you as a member of our bar to help instill public confidence in the judicial system by your actions. And that means in each case that you handle, every paper you file, every court appearance that you make, and whenever you give advice to a client. Remember also that you are being admitted to practice in a real city with a vibrant community. Real people live and work here, and real people have real needs here. And that includes the need for legal services, for tutoring, for mentoring. In this connection, I want to remind you of Rule 6.1 of the Rules of Professional Responsibility, by which your conduct as a member of the DC Bar must be guided. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I will read only the first sentence of that rule. And it says that a lawyer should participate in serving those persons or groups of persons who are unable to pay all or a portion of reasonable attorney's fees, or who are otherwise unable to obtain counsel. A resolution that was adopted by the DC Court's Judicial Conference, as well as by the Judicial Conference of the DC Circuit, specifies what this professional obligation entails. It is that each lawyer should accept one court appointment or devote at least 50 hours of pro bono legal service each year to an indigent or disadvantaged client. Or if that is not feasible, to make a financial contribution of the lesser of $750 or 1% of earned income to organizations that provide legal services to the disadvantaged. I suggest that you do both. The need is certainly great. Many persons with pressing legal needs go without legal representation. A shockingly high percentage have no choice but to represent themselves in landlord-tenant court and in cases of domestic violence. This is occurring in a community which, as I mentioned earlier, has the highest number of lawyers on a per capita basis in the country. Many of their needs are in areas within your practice, and they'll be familiar to you. But you could decide to take on a new area, and there are programs that will teach you what you need to know, so your pro bono work will be up to par with your billed work, as it should be. Those of you who have language skills are sorely needed. I have been addressing new members of our bar for over 20 years, and invariably I speak, and so do all of us on this bench, speak about the need because it is so great. I would just want to mention several items for the report of the DC Access to Justice Commission entitled Rationing Justice, and I will only give some. Statistics on persons who appear in DC Superior Court without legal representation. In formal probate matters, about 45%. In smaller, 98% in small estate matters. Petitions and respondents in domestic violence, in the domestic violence unit, over 90% have no lawyer. In divorce and custody cases, over 70% don't have any legal representation. In landlord-tenant court, over 90% of defendants don't have a lawyer. Even in this court, on appeal, where, as you know, arguments have to be presented, briefs have to be filed that conform to certain requirements and forms, any number of people have to prosecute their cases without a lawyer. In administrative cases, for example, most of which deal with unemployment compensation benefits, about 56% have no lawyer on appeal. And in civil cases, the number is over 35%. That would include civil cases, landlord and tenant cases. Also over 50% in family cases involving custody and civil protection orders. And the numbers that I just mentioned in DC are not unique here. In fact, they just reflect what is happening throughout the country. This is a national issue. So wherever you're from, wherever you may practice, the unmet need for legal representation is really a sobering call to our profession. Here are some examples from the 2019 budget request to Congress of the Legal Services Corporation. In Arkansas, for example, over 90% of people facing foreclosure or debt collection have no lawyer. In Massachusetts, in landlord-tenant cases, about 90% don't have a lawyer. In New York City, again, in the high 90 percentile for cases that involve landlord and tenant and consumer debt. Same thing in Philadelphia. So it's really quite a staggering problem, and we need everybody's help. You look around this room, there are a lot of lawyers and a lot of legal talent. So there is something you can do to make this situation better. The lawyers of the District of Columbia Bar have a long tradition of providing pro bono legal service to the economically disadvantaged, and this court recognizes those efforts, as does the federal court. We have a pro bono honor roll for those who meet the benchmark in the rule of professional responsibility. There are many programs for pro bono service available through the DC Bar and voluntary bar associations and law firms, and they run the gamut from helping one person navigate a claim for disability compensation, to representing an abused or neglected child, to assisting an immigrant seeking asylum from persecution in another country. You might be helping a person sort through what appears to a layperson to be an incomprehensible and devastating problem, but you can actually help resolve what are many times fairly minor knots that can nonetheless tie up a person's life. On the other end of the spectrum, you could be writing a brief for a person on death row. Another way is through service directed to the courts by volunteering to take over representation of pro se litigants in civil litigation. And those cases run the gamut of civil litigation in the District of Columbia at the trial and appellate levels. So there is a lot to do, and I urge you to consider how you can help represent a person in need. When you do, you will realize that you will be getting much more for yourself as well. Many of us, and I include judges in this, when we look back over our professional careers and what we have accomplished, and we ponder whether all the sacrifices made along the way have been worth it, we often find that the most satisfying work, professionally and personally, have been the efforts that we made in cases handled on a pro bono basis. It reminds you that law can indeed be a noble profession that furthers values of fairness and justice that we hold dear. These are the values that motivated many of us to study law in the first place. Don't forget that. And speaking of what is important, have a life outside your law practice, a rich personal life, your friends and your family. Spend time with them. They have supported you and helped you during your law studies. They will hear you complain often enough about the long hours at work and about the difficulties of the job market. But have a life. Being a lawyer is a terrific thing, but it is not the only thing. Again, I welcome you and congratulate you on your admission to the Bar of the District of Columbia, and we wish you the very best in your practice before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Ruiz. I think we should now follow your advice and let you go have a life. And so we're going to adjourn.
All right.